It's all about third base today because the Cincinnati Reds have hit the reset button with Noelvi Marte.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. I've been hosting this podcast now going on to my 7th season, and I'm so glad to be bringing you Reds content every single day because Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day. And on today's show, we're 17 days away from opening day, which means we're talking about the Grand Marshal for this year's opening day parade a little bit later on in today's show. And speaking of third base, I want to lay out what that plan looks like for the Reds now with now that things have changed here in just a few minutes. But we will begin with why Noelvi Marte is not part of that plan, at least for now. That's all coming up on today's episode that is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's over at FanDuel.com. All right, the Reds sent down Noelvi Marte. He was part of a group of 6 players that were assigned to minor league camp on Monday, but he was optioned to Louisville on Monday. And it's interesting because we've talked a lot about him this offseason, and I think that we've set the expectation. We thought he would begin the year in AAA. It's interesting that the Reds decided to do it this early. I mean, there's still 46 players in big league camp right now. So there's still a lot of cuts that need to be made. He was not one of the final cuts. He didn't make it to that point. So it's intriguing to me to see this. I wasn't surprised in general, but I was surprised at how quickly it's become. But it's clear that the Reds are starting over with Noelvi Marte. He's got to basically rebuild his own resume. He's got to figure out how he fits into the Reds' future plans. We were penciling him in. I penciled him in, and I don't really think Steve gave me much pushback on that, which, by the way, Steve will be back with us tomorrow. But I don't think Steve gave me too much pushback that going into last season, before the suspension, he was penciled in as the third baseman of the future. He was part of the core, at least on paper, pencil, not in ink yet, but he was getting there. And then the suspension happened, and then he came back from suspension. He was horrible after his suspension. I mean, let's consider this. I went back and I looked. I combined his performance from 2024 with what he did in the Dominican Winter League and what he did in spring training. So I put that all together over the last, a little under a calendar year for him. But that's 106 games played across those 3 areas. He has a total of 346 at-bats during that time, and he has a batting average of 211. He has a slugging percentage of under 400. That's not what we're expecting. That's not what his profile is. Scouts had him as a powerful bat, kind of guy you could slot in potentially to the middle of your batting order and feel good about that. But even more so, outside of the batting average and how low it is and the slugging percentage and all that, in 106 games across the major leagues, Dominican Winter League, and spring training, he has 19 walks. That's it during that time. And 105 strikeouts. He's been horrible at the plate. But then you take that and you look at the fact that he's still making errors. He was making errors in spring training, playing third base. He made errors in the Dominican Winter League. He made a lot of errors last season. The dude's not good with the glove either. If you're not good with the glove and you're not good with the bat, what are you doing? And that's really where the Reds have come now. I mean, I think it's good. As much as it surprises me that he was cut early, I think it's good that Terry Francona and the Reds are telling him now that it's not good enough. He's got to figure something out. He's got to, I don't know if it's mechanical, if it's all mental, what it is. If there's a block somewhere, that Noelvi Marte is just not the guy that the Reds traded for whenever they acquired him in the Luis Castillo trade. He's not the guy that they were thinking they're going to hand third base to. because quite frankly, a tiny sample size, but in 2023 at the end of the season, it started to look like he could be the guy that they were looking for. It's clear he's not. And so he was a guy that had options. It was, easy for the Reds to send him down to minor league camp because they control that and they have a couple of options they can use for that. And he's going to begin the season in Louisville. I'm not sure when we see him. I don't know how quickly he can rebuild his resume to the point that they're calling him back up to the major leagues. And I think that it's a committee at third base right now, and I definitely want to get into that plan here in a few minutes because it's not just going to be one guy. But the fact that he cannot even fit in that committee right now, there's going to have to be an injury, I think, open that up because he's got to go down to AAA. And for me, that's the other part of this because what is he going to do at AAA is kind of the question that you have a lot with guys like Noelvi Marte, where it's like his talent is clearly better than the AAA level, but that's what he should have been proving in the Dominican Winter League. It's what he should have been proving in spring training. And he wasn't. Because normally, guys like Noelvi Marte go tear it up. I mean, even a couple of years ago, he was tearing it up in the Arizona Fall League, and we were saying, wait a minute. Don't get too crazy about this guy. We got to see him do it at the major league level. So you would expect him to go to the Dominican Winter League, and you would expect him in spring training to tear it up and go crazy. But he hasn't. In fact, in the Dominican Winter League, he only hit like 227. In spring training, he was hitting below 200. He had 3 total hits in 20 at-bats in spring training. It's interesting that it was a double and 2 triples, so nice to see the extra base stuff there. But 3 hits in 20 at-bats, 1 walk and 8 strikeouts. He is not an efficient hitter right now. He's not a good out. He's a bad out. So even though he's not hitting, he's also not providing value when he gets out. So there's a lot about him right now that's just kind of a black hole. He's got to figure it out. He's got to stop being that black hole in order to return to some sort of future plan for the Reds. Is it at third base at this point? Could there be an opportunity for the Reds to say, we're hitting the reset button so much that we're going to send you down to AAA, we're going to move you to the outfield? Because there were some rumblings of that in the offseason. But I don't necessarily know if they want to mess with that or where he's at in his career right now is so confusing because the scouting reports were so bullish on him and his athleticism and his ability to hit and things like that. They were saying this could be a guy. And at least after some of the other prospects had graduated from prospectdom last season, he was considered the Reds' top prospect. And while that's kind of not been the best thing to be in years past, he might be following along the footsteps of more closely to Nick Senzel and Jose Barrero than to Ellie De La Cruz. And that's a bummer to say right now, but that's where we are. He is literally back to square one. He's got to completely rebuild his resume, and he's got to rebuild because his expectation, there are no expectations right now for Noelvi Marte. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, because I think I'm one of the more optimistic Noelvi Marte fans out there, because I still think he can get back. I still think we can see him at some point this year. I just don't know how early that's going to be. Like, I think the most optimistic prognostication about Noelvi Marte, and without there being some sort of big injury on the infield, is that we see him back in June. Maybe. I mean, especially with Spencer Steer coming back, like the committee for third base right now, all of the guys that are on this list look like they're pretty far ahead of him as far as how much you trust him in the major leagues. I want to get into what that includes, and I'll tell you who I see getting the most of the playing time at third base. We'll do that coming up next. March Madness is here, and hey, it's the perfect time to put in your futures bets for the MLB season over at FanDuel. FanDuel is the best way to make some money off of your sports knowledge, and right now, because of March Madness and everything going on, your first winning $5 bet can get you $200 in bonus bets if it wins, like I mentioned. But I love some futures right now for the Reds, and there's an easy layup. I mean, this over, this feels easy. And maybe that's a bad thing. And usually it is whenever a bet feels easy, but this feels easy. Over 24 and a half homers for Ellie De La Cruz. I mean, he hit more than that last year. And I think that with his changes to his batting stance, that's an easy over. So head on over to FanDuel, click the over on 24 and a half homers for Ellie De La Cruz, and check out some March Madness stuff too, because that first winning $5 bet can get you $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make sure you subscribe, become an everydayer. Shout out to those of you who are everydayers of the Locked On Reds podcast, but become an everydayer by hitting that subscribe button here on YouTube and on your favorite podcasting app, because we're going to be with you every single day all throughout the year. All right, so with Noelvi Marte no longer being a part of the third base plan right now, there's like 4 guys who still are. At least, when Spencer Steer is healthy, he's going to be a part of this plan. But let's look at the new plan, because they're going to employ a rotation of players at third base, and they're likely going to play the hot hand. Terry Francona likes to play the hot hand when it comes to positions that don't have a dude at them, and the Reds don't really have a dude who's going to play at third base right now. So I think probably what's going to happen early on this season, and very likely on opening day, is that they go with the best glove first. Before Jose Ramirez showed up in Cleveland, that's what Terry Francona did. And a lot of the time, the guy that played third base for the Cleveland Indians back then was Lonnie Chisenhall. Not a guy that was really known for his hitting, but a guy that was known for having a good glove and being very consistent in the field. So I think that's really what they're going to go with first, which means my bet for the opening day third baseman right now, so long as he maintains his health, Santiago Espinal. Santiago Espinal has been playing a lot of third base here in spring training, and I think that he's a guy that it factors well into the theory that it's going to be glove first at third base, especially when you can put CES at first and Jeimer Candelario in the DH spot. I mean, I think Candelario gets a little bit of playing time at third, but I think it's mostly going to be Santiago Espinal. Now, it's interesting to note that throughout their careers, Jeimer Candelario far and away exceeds anybody else on the roster with playing time at third base. So if they go with experience first, he's the easy pick. But at least according to outs above average, Santiago Espinal is far and away the best third baseman. Because according to outs above average for the entirety of each of these players' careers, I'm looking at 4 guys that are going to get time at first base or at third base. Yeah, Candelario, Santiago Espinal, Spencer Steer whenever he's healthy. I don't think that's going to be on opening day. But whenever he comes back off the injured list, again, not put on the injured list, but I'm kind of like mentally marking him there for right now until we see him back, until we see reports that he's healthy and ready to go. I think that's probably what's going to happen. But I think that at least at some point this season, he'll factor into the third base picture. And then Gavin Lux. However, Gavin Lux has exactly one professional game at third base in his entire career. He's been playing since 2019. So it's not like he just got here. But yeah, in his entire professional career, Gavin Lux has played exactly one game at third base, but I think he will see some time at that position. But I've kind of waffled on this a little bit. I think I said a couple of weeks ago that Gavin Lux will be the opening day third baseman. I now believe that Santiago Espinal will be the opening day third baseman. And the reason why is the defense. Outs above average, which is not an end-all be-all. I admit, like if you want to argue defensive runs saved over outs above average, that's fine. You can do that. I'm not going to really stand on a table for one statistics over another, especially because I think fielding still is more of a thing that, the eye test is even more valuable than the numbers. But at least for outs above average, Santiago Espinal is far and above the other options. He has 5 outs above average, +5 for his career. Jeimer Candelario has -5 outs above average at third base for his career. Now, it's worth noting, last year he was decidedly negative, -6 outs above average at third base in 2024 for Jeimer Candelario. He was positive, though. He had +2 outs above average in 2023. So it's not as if he has been completely worthless at that position for a long time. It's just he sort of fluctuates. And I think that injuries definitely played a role in that. But still, for his career, Santiago Espinal better than Jeimer Candelario at third base. Spencer Steer, for what it's worth, -7, outs above average at third base. He didn't play there last year. Played there mostly in 2022 and 2023. But I think that the committee, at least early on, will be led by Santiago Espinal. But I think for me, the guy to watch is Gavin Lux, because he'll play second base whenever Matt McLain doesn't. But I think that's going to be few and far between. Maybe once every 2 weeks he plays at second base. And then maybe they DH McLain a little bit early, and we see more playing time at second base early for Gavin Lux. But I think Gavin Lux's opportunity for more playing time is going to be at third base. Austin Hayes has really, in my mind, cemented himself as the everyday left fielder. And as long as Jake Fraley and Stuart Fairchild are healthy, those are your two guys in right field. And you're not putting Gavin Lux in center field. It's just not going to happen. So Gavin Lux, for me, his most opportunity to play is at third base. And while we've only seen it a little bit here in spring training, I think we'll see it more as the season goes along, and they're going to play him there to see what they've got in Gavin Lux at third base. But when you combine performance and experience at that position, for me, it's Santiago Espinal is going to get that first look. I think we'll see Jeimer Candelario play more DH than any other spot in the field this year, just because it's nice to have that switch hit bat in the lineup. And I don't necessarily know that a healthy Christian Encarnacion Strand needs to be taken out for any reason. I think that we see Christian Encarnacion Strand play something close to like 150 games this year. So for me, Candelario is going to see more time at DH. And then on days when they need to DH Tyler Stevenson, then we see Candelario in the field. But I think that it's more Espinal than Candelario at third base. And then Spencer Steer and Gavin Lux will factor in there somewhere as well. For me, Noelvi Marte has really got to do a lot of work to get into this group. As much as Gavin Lux has no experience, barely. I mean, he's got one more game at third base than you and I do in the major leagues. I still think that Gavin Lux is ahead of him right now because the bat is more consistent. Noelvi Marte is very, all or nothing when it came to his performances, especially last year. And there were a lot of nothing performances. And I think that he's got to develop some sort of consistency as his game. Maybe it's a mental block, like I mentioned, but I don't see him ahead of even Gavin Lux on this list. So currently there are 3 guys ahead of him. When Spencer Steer is healthy, there's 4 guys ahead of him to play third base. And Candelario will play a little bit of first base. Spencer Steer is going to play some first base. He'll play some outfield. Santiago Espinal, I mean, he's Ellie's only backup at shortstop, but Ellie's not going to come out hardly at all. I mean, Ellie missed 2 games in 2024. So long as he is healthy and there's no injuries that are nagging at him or something like that, Ellie's going to play every day. And like I said, the backup playing at second base is probably Gavin Lux. So Espinal figures to play mostly third base. And I think that he has earned a good look there. I mean, let's not forget that second half that Santiago Espinal had last year. For much of the second half of the season, we were talking about him having the best batting average in the league, not just on the team. He was hitting over 400 for like a month. And I know that he had a really rough start, hitting below 200 there that first month. And that's why overall his season didn't look all that great on the numbers. But it was a tale of 2 halves. And the second half was so much more kind to Santiago Espinal. And defensively, I feel like you know what you're going to get out of him. And seeing a left side of the infield that has Ellie De La Cruz and Santiago Espinal, I like the range there. Santiago Espinal's arm is going to be a little bit of a question mark at third base, but overall, I'm not worried about ground balls trickling through. I'm not worried about a lot of errors happening on that left side because I think Ellie's going to be a lot cleaner in the field than we saw in 2024. It's the same thing that happened in Barry Larkin's career, right? Everybody's worried about the errors. Everybody was worried about the errors in the second full year of Barry Larkin's career. I think Ellie's going to clean a lot of that up. He's going to be really good at shortstop. And then you got Matt McLean, who's a very consistent fielder at second base, and CES, who now that he is healthy, it looks like he's got some decent range. And we're probably talking about some good things overall for the infield defense of the Reds this season. Even though a cast of characters really doesn't change that much, I think that we're going to see a much more improved defense for that. And that's going to be a big reason why I think Espinal gets the early time at third base. But we'll see a little bit of Candy, and we'll see a little bit of Spencer Steer once he's healthy, and we'll see a little bit of Gavin Lux there as well. But we are Chris Sabo days away from opening day. We're talking spuds and a few other notable number 17s coming up next. If you can't watch us on YouTube, you can listen to us on your favorite podcasting app because we're on all of them. Check us out today. All right, 17 days away. We are officially less than 3 weeks. It's so exciting. Can't wait. Opening day almost here. Nice weather here in, the greater Cincinnati area on Monday, March 10th as well. We're up above 60, sunny outside. Love it. Can't wait to get out and take advantage of it. But 17, that's Chris Sabo. For me, I don't know that there's a whole lot of an argument here, even though, it's not like Chris Sabo's number was retired, and I'm not arguing that at all. But I think that Chris Sabo is the best number 17 on the list of guys who have worn that number. And that's actually a pretty extensive list when you look at it. Of course, you got our current number 17 and Stuart Fairchild, but there's definitely a lot of other guys who wore it. Kyle Farmer wore it before Fairchild. You had Josh Van Meter as well. But again, none of those guys touched Chris Sabo. In his 7 years as a Red, he had 17.4 WAR, according to Baseball Reference. Kind of funny to note that 3 of those 7 years, he got pretty much all of that. He had 14.3 wins above replacement when you combine 1988, 1990, and 1991. For those that don't know, Chris Sabo was Rookie of the Year in 1988, and he was a 3-time All-Star. But as much as he was one of the leaders of the 1990 World Series team, he actually had a better year in 1991. He hit 300 in 1991, got on base 35% of the time, and he slugged over 500 for the entire year. And we're not talking about a short year. In 1991, he played the most games of any year of his career. He played 153 games in 1991, and he slugged over 500. That's not something that you think of. At least not for me. Like, looking back on his career, and I didn't get the chance to really watch him closely. I was too young to really understand the game of baseball back then. But to see what he has done in his career and kind of compare 1991 to the rest of the years of his career, he was a slugging machine that year. And it's funny because I've lived a couple of I've grown up mostly around Cincinnati, so that's why I've always had a tie to the team. But at the same time, I lived in some other places, and for the most part, when I lived in Kentucky, when I lived in Alabama, places like that, I've always worn glasses, and I've always worn a lot of red stuff. So everybody called me Chris Sabo. It's like, look at Chris Sabo coming on down here, or something like that. That was a nickname people like to call me a lot. But I've always had that connection to him, even though I didn't get the chance to watch him closely while ever he played. But clearly the best number 17 on this list. But there were some notable mentions, some honorable mentions. Aaron Boone, of course, makes the mention list. He had 11 WAR in 7 years as a Red. And I will always remember that there was a day game when I was in 8th grade that we took a field trip to the Reds game, and Aaron Boone hit 3 homers against the Cardinals. Like, hey, that's a pretty good day at school when you get to go to a Reds game and see a guy hit 3 home runs, especially against those stinking Cardinals. But yeah, 11 WAR as a Red in 7 years. And then for those that want to argue the differences of, okay, one-hit wonders versus guys who had good careers as a Red, I don't know that Shin-Soo Choo is a big argument over Chris Sabo for the best number 17, but definitely had a really, really good year in 2013. That one season, I think a lot of folks, especially this era of Reds fans, really remember Shin-Soo Choo and remember him fondly for that one season. And he was the gap guy, the go between in center field, getting it ready for Billy Hamilton. Knowing what we know now, I would be interested in this. I don't know that I have an answer to it, but I'll ask you this and you put your answer in the chat. Knowing what we know now, would you have signed Shin-Soo Choo to a longer deal and said, you know what, Billy, you wait right there? Or maybe you play on the infield or whatever, but we'll let you wait a little bit longer and bring Shin-Soo Choo back. Now, I will say this, whenever he left the Reds and he went to Texas, Shin-Soo Choo did not have that great of a career in Texas. He played like 7 years in Texas, and he got like a total of 8 WAR because he was hurt a lot. That was the latter part of his career. So he really didn't play as well in Texas as he did the 1 year in Cincinnati or his time in Cleveland before he came to Cincinnati. But anyway, yeah, the 1 year that Shin-Soo Choo had, he got on base 42% of the time. That was that year that, I think he and Joey Votto both had an on base percentage above 400. And it was like, wow, 2 guys in the same lineup. And for that year to end in the wild card game in Pittsburgh, so annoying. And then you have a couple of guys who wore the number 17 for just 1 year, although they might have had, or two of these guys had longer careers as a Red. You had All-Star, Gold Glover, and Reds Hall of Famer Leo Cardenas. He actually wore the number 17 in 1960. And then Ernie Lombardi, who is the best catcher not named Johnny Bench in Reds history. Ernie Lombardi wore the number 17 back in 1935. You got to go back a ways for all of this stuff, but it's kind of interesting to see that one. And then there's a Hall of Fame player. He was a Hall of Famer for his career with the Brooklyn Dodgers back in the 20s, but he actually is an obscure former Red. Not that I think our buddy Ken goes all the way back to the 1930s for obscure former Reds, because there's plenty of obscure former Reds here in like the most recent decade. You don't have to go back that far, but an obscure former Red from 1934, Dazzy Vance. And those of you that really know your baseball history will remember that name. But Dazzy Vance, Hall of Fame Brooklyn Dodger, he played 6 games as a Red in 1934, and he wore the number 17. Thought it was worthy of an honorable mention here. But yeah, Chris Sabo days away from opening day, the Grand Marshal for your opening day parade. I think it's a well-deserved honor for him, and that's going to conclude our third base episode. We talk about one third baseman on the way down to AAA, and one third baseman is about ready to lead the opening day parade, and who's going to play a lot of third base here in 2025. It's going to be an interesting conundrum for Terry Francona, but I think it's going to be the hot hand, but he's going to go glove first early, so we're going to see a lot of Santiago Espinal early this season. But that's going to do it for us here today. That'll wrap up today's Locked On Reds podcast. Make sure that you're subscribed. Thanks, as always, for making us your first listen every single day. I know we've been a little bit later on as I've dealt with, this wonderful cold, and I think I'm finally on the other side of it. But thanks, everybody, for, bearing with me through all of this. But Steve will be back tomorrow. We'll have our the show all back together, and we're going to get you set. We've got a lot to talk about, previewing some positions and some players like that. And this was kind of our third base look. Definitely a lot more coming at you this week as we get you set for opening day. Not too far away. Make sure you're subscribed, becoming every dayer on your favorite podcasting app and right here on YouTube, because as you know, we will be with you every single day because we are Locked On Reds every single day. Also, sneaky movie rec. If you haven't seen Mickey 17, if you like you some sci-fi, go see Mickey 17. Saw that last night. Can't recommend it enough. Great movie.